that is presented today or those who missed, unfortunately, the webinar. Therefore, we ask you to keep your microphones muted until you are asked to speak. And if you would like to ask the question or to provide a comment, we ask you to raise your hand. That is the most efficient way for me to see and to ask you to speak. So, as I said, today we will be talking about safe, healthy learning and working environments, which are an inherent part of inclusive education, inclusive schools. And we talked during the first webinar about whole school approach, and safe and healthy learning and working environment are also part of that approach, obviously. When we talk about it, the first thing that comes in mind is schools that are in education institutions that are free from bullying and harassment, where everyone feels safe, everyone feels included, and can focus on their learning, on their work, despite of the differences, despite of the background, and overall having a healthy mental environment is also extremely important. But it's much broader topic than just addressing violence and harassment and bullying. It's also about having an environment where the stress is addressed, where everyone feels safe and everyone feels that he or she can share the views, etc. So we will try to tackle all of these various elements today. And our research shows that 93% of ETUCE member organizations, education trade unions, call for training on this topic, including handling difficult situations in the classroom. Is one of the most difficult topics for education personnel to address. Harassment and cyberbullying included. Stress and teachers' mental health, as well as the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the safe and healthy learning and working environments. And we saw that in the past year, now year and several months already, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been really strong on the safe and healthy working and learning environments. For example, violence, harassment, and bullying, not only between the students, but also from students and parents towards teachers, in the families as well, which is actually linked to the gaps in the implementing inclusive education. It has intensified a lot during this year, and especially in the context of distant learning, due to various reasons, one of which, of course, is the lack of personal contact during the distant learning, but also the stress and frustration that both students, parents, teachers, education personnel had because of the situation. So we will also touch on that topic today. And of course, it's impossible for education personnel and teachers to ensure safe and healthy learning environments when students are not physically present there. So there is a lot of different issues that we're going to tackle today. Next slide, please. I will shortly present you the project background in which we're implementing this series of webinars. ETUCE has worked a lot on the different topics of equality and inclusion, gender equality, LGBTI communities, migration, many different topics. But in this project, we were trying to actually bring all of them together and to look at the topic of inclusive education as an overarching concept. So we took the results of many different projects and activities, for example, of the ETUCE Standing Committee for Equality. We took them all together and we tried to look at them from the perspective of inclusive education. And therefore, these webinars are also part of sharing the practices that we collected during these projects. Next slide, please. So the objective of the project was to build the capacity of education trade unions to prepare their affiliates to address the diversity in the classroom and in the society, and to support them in implementing inclusive learning environments, enabling for every student and teacher to achieve their full potential. So there are various smaller components of this big aim that we gave ourselves, one of which is to have a concrete and practical strategy for education trade unions on how to ensure equality, diversity, and inclusion in education. The other one is also to raise awareness on the lack of funding and supportive policy framework for inclusive education, and of course, to disseminate successful good practices. Next slide, please. So project activities that we already implemented, it's the second year of the project. We already had a full research done on the topic. We collected various good practices from our member organizations. We also launched an online survey among ETUCE members. And of course, we collected the background, the research literature on the topic. So you can already find on the ETUCE website a research report with various annexes in English, French, and Russian. I will not go into details on this research because we have later on a presentation from the project researcher, but there are also good practices are also collected in the catalog of good practices, which is now in preparation. And they will be also integrated in the ETUCE database of good practices. So that's the platform where you can find various good practices on different topics of inclusive education. And you can also reach out to organizations who realize those practices. In January, we also had a seminar on the topic. This was the first brainstorming, the first discussion that we had with education trade unions on inclusive schools and different components of it, on how inclusive education is varying among different countries, and how it's implemented to a very different degree and to a very different understanding in different countries. And now we are implementing these 3 interactive training webinars in March, April. So one, as I said, already took place in March. This is the second one. The first one focused on whole school approach. This second one focuses on healthy and safe learning and working environments. And there will be a third one in April that will focus on ICT for inclusion. And in October, 4th and 5th October 2021, we will have a closing conference where all the materials, all the outcomes of the project will be brought together and discussed with participants. And the outcome of it is also to have this practical strategy for implementing the action plan on equality, diversity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. Another big activity in this project is a series of European and national action days to raise awareness about the professional needs of teachers, academics, and other education personnel when it comes to addressing diversity in the classroom and in the society. Because we also aimed with this project to raise the awareness about education personnel needs and that they have to be supported in implementing inclusive education. Therefore, we took the key dates of equality, focusing on the equality, such as International Day of Persons with Disabilities, International Migrants Day, 8th of March, etc. So we took those days as an opportunity to share various messages, to raise the awareness, to start the social media campaigns, both on the European level, but also supporting our member organizations on the national level. Therefore, at the links in the presentation, you can see various trade union actions in different countries, in your countries as well, that were implemented for these days and will be, you see there are 2 more days left on the 17th of May and 5th of October, as well as you can see testimonies from teachers about their personal experience with the topics various topics of inclusive education. And of course, you can check ETUCE social media. Next slide, please. There you will see various examples. On this slide, we just put some examples for you to see of the messages that we prepared. So ETUCE prepares a communication package that it sends to member organizations. Member organizations can put their own messages, add to it, or follow the ETUCE messages on social media. And that way we are sharing both actions, good practices, thoughts, testimonies, etc. So I invite you all, if you would like to share some practices or actions that your unions are implementing, I invite you to contact us for the 17th of May, the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, and also for the Work Teachers Day in October. So I invite you to send those to us or to let us know that you're going to implement them, and we will support it and also bring the light at the European level to those actions. Now back to the seminar. This was a short presentation of the project. Next speaker that I would like to introduce to you is Professor Peter Paulus. Professor Peter Paulus is a guest professor and head at the Center for Applied Science of Health in Leuphana University in Germany. He focuses on educational psychology, family psychology, health psychology, education, counseling, and promotion. He is also a head of research of several national-wide projects that are relating to school health promotion. For example, Mind Matters, promotion of mental health and education in primary and secondary schools. He is also a German representative in the School for Health in Europe network. He is a member of the School Mental Health International Leadership Exchange Core Development Team. And also he is a member of the steering committee of ETUCE, European Network Education and Training in Occupational Safety and Health. So Professor Paulus has a very extensive expertise on the topic, and he will share with us the European perspective on key elements of safe and healthy learning and working environment in education. Welcome, Professor. I'm giving you the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, to all the participants, can you hear me? And also, Katerina, can you hear me? It's all okay? You can see me, hear me, wonderful. So greetings to all of you. I'm happy to be with you today. And within 15 minutes, I want to tell you a little bit about the European perspective. And I have to focus in this 15 minutes because 15 minutes are too short to give a complete overview of all the core elements. And my presentation will also link a little bit to the whole school approach, because I'm from this perspective, I'm working on it for 20 years now. And the experience we had in Germany and also in Europe has linked to the whole school approach, and the idea of safety and health in schools, which I will talk today to you, is linked to this approach. So I will start with my presentation, and hopefully it will work. Yes, I think so. Wonderful. Yes, you can see here. And I will start with the agenda with a short overview to give you what I'm talking about today. First of all, it's about basic experience and learnings that we have in Europe about these concepts and approaches about safe and healthy educational settings. And I will focus a little bit, as I said before, on schools as an example of these educational settings, the good and safe and healthy educational setting, and I will explain it in more detail from the perspective of the educational setting school. And then I will focus a little bit on the framework of educational quality of schools as a reference for safety and health measurements in educational settings, and especially in schools. And then I will look on the educational dimensions and criteria for school quality, how they can be complemented by safety and health indicators. And at the end, I will take a look a little bit forward. What are the partners on European level which support this idea? And also that we have to keep in mind that the school as a system is changing, and maybe there are new approaches needed in the future to work on safety and health in schools. But this is at the end, and maybe it relates a little bit to the discussion that we can have at the end. So I will go on. Yeah, good models for good practice and analysis of models of good practice in the database of ETUCE. And in the database of ETUCE, there are more than 1,000 models of good practice. And Bollmann and colleagues analyzed all these good practices, and they identified 8 different concepts or models of good practice. And I cannot go through to all of them. And in bold letters, the school development model using safety and health to make good schools, that is the one that I will focus on. The other one you can see in the brochure that is on the right side of the presentation. You can download this and have a closer look to all these 8 different models of good practice. The basic idea, the basic learning is a paradigmatic shift in that, therefore, we have this 3rd model that I was talking about. Safety and health from an add-on to an add-in. To develop safety and health in schools from an add-in perspective and not just to put it from outside. Because safety and health will only be implemented, you can read this, successfully and sustainable if they are linked with education, which is the core business of educational settings. And in this case, the school could also be kindergarten, could also be universities and other educational settings. It is important that we link safety and health to the basic and core business of these institutions. And therefore, it's an add-in instead of an add-on from outside. So we have to change the perspective from school safety and health to promotion, to education promotion through health and safety, just to think it the other way around. And we have to ask ourselves, what have safety and health to offer education in schools? Safety and health as an input and throughput factor for teaching, learning, and educational school development. How can we contribute to this? Safety and health as a driver of education, and to make good schools through safety and health. And at the end, we developed a concept of the good, safe, and healthy school. And you can see on the right side of the presentation, you can see from the DGUV, that is the German Social Excellent Insurance, they produced a paper in 2013 about using health to develop good schools as a strategic concept for this large organization in Germany. And on the right side, you can see a journal from the Ministry of Education in North Rhine-Westphalia, on the biggest German state, which says you have to change the perspective. So that means changing the perspective, a new paradigmatic shift we have to take over. Linking health and education, the good safe and healthy school is a new concept. And the schools, they are working in this concept, are schools that are, of course, committed to work on the quality dimensions of a good school. That is their core business. We don't want to focus their attention to something else. We want that they are good schools, that they are good teachers. And these schools apply safety and health interventions in order to fulfill the demands of school quality. They work in the direction of promote the quality of the school. And that is the overarching aim of the school, the sustainable and efficient increase in teaching and educational quality. And on the right side, you see the cartoon. That means health is an input or throughput factor, and the output and outcome at the end is educational quality of the school. So how to do this? We developed a school check to help schools to identify how far they have integrated safety and health interventions within the process of development of quality of their own school. And to show this gives you some examples. First of all, you can see here the dimensional framework of school quality. On the top line, horizontal line, you see the dimensions of school quality that we are using in German. This is one from the Bertelsmann Foundation. That framework is used in several German states. And you can see that there are 6 dimensions of school quality: results, learning and teaching processes, school culture, leadership and school management, professionalization of teachers, and objectives and strategies of quality development. Maybe you are familiar with this, maybe not in all countries in Europe, but many of the countries, they have these kind of frameworks to look after the quality of schools and school quality. And I will show you in some examples how these safety and health indicators that can be integrated in this framework. And as I said before, on the top line, in the horizontal line, you see the dimensions, and the vertical line, you see the criteria. And behind these criteria are the indicators where school can work on, and schools work on it from the teacher's perspective, heads of school perspective, parents, and also pupils in this framework here, as I showed you from the Bertelsmann Foundation. So I can show you some examples, and then you get an idea how we work on this to create a good, safe, good, and healthy school. So, for example, learning and teaching process, that is one of the dimensions, and the methodic diversity of learning in class is one of the criteria. And within the criteria, there are a lot of indicators, and some of those are related to good, healthy, and safe and healthy school. And for example, in the good, safe, and healthy school, staff are concerned that pupils understand lessons as comprehensible, meaningfulness, thus supported in their behavioral capacity, skills, self-effectiveness, self-esteem. That's a little bit related to Aaron Antonovsky's concept of coherence. And staff ensures interdisciplinary teaching of health matters, including practices, what they preach. And the rooms and seating arrangements, furniture, and ambience are created with health promoting principles in mind. For example, offering emotional security, enabling sufficient, enabling sufficient mobility, and eye contact between pupils, and ensuring sufficient fresh air supply. That is more related to safe aspects of schooling, and the others are more on health, mental health aspects. But this is an idea, and the schools have to go through their school check and have to think about and discuss in the staff how far they are on that, in this dimension of learning and teaching processes. Do they have enough methodic diversity of learning in class? So that is, and what enables them to do this. And this is one of the aspects of the good, safe, and healthy school. And the second one is, for example, school culture and creating a friendly school environment. And in a good, safe, and healthy school, they have various social gatherings like meetings on good, safe, and healthy information, nutrition, counseling, cooking and relaxation, leisure courses, sport activities, and so on. The school makes sure that all members are given the opportunity to participate. They have health circles and so on, which all parties are represented, gender-specific differences, and so on. And again, the staff and the pupils and teachers and also, and the head of school, they have to discuss it in their own school, how far they are on their way, what is important for them to work on, what is already done. That is an idea to create more discussion in the school about how the school should be, and health and safety and health indicators here are integrated in the discussion about their own school quality. That is not something extra, that is integrated in their yearly discussion about creating the quality of the school. And the other one is about leadership and school management. The other one is about, I will not go through to all of them, teachers' professionalization, purposeful staff development and qualification. For example, in a good, safe, healthy school, the school administration is aware of work-related physical and psychological pressures are brought to bear on the staff and implements measures to keep them to a minimum. Do they have that or don't? Do not have this? So, and staff is trained in basic principle and method for school safety and health promotion. Do they have these kind of trainings in their school? Do they have an idea what is meant by this? And from where can they get support in the development of the qualification of the teachers' professionalization. So the idea is to create discussion in the school, to talk about this, to make it a topic when they talk about school quality. Don't forget health and safety aspects in the development of the quality of the school. Yeah, evaluation, of course, is also important. They look for safety and health aspects in evaluation so that they can plan from the data they have about these aspects in their school. Do they have a regular safety and health and educational quality of the school or not? So that is also important. So there are some aspects that I want to show you about how can the good and healthy, safe and healthy school could be developed, and partners in developing the concept and implementation and dissemination of the good and safe and healthy school are on the European level, the ETUCE. Ekaterina mentioned it already in the beginning. At the moment, we have 100 members from 32 countries and more than 1,000 models of good practice from 52 countries on safety and health and education, not only in schools, kindergarten, and also other aspects of workplace, for example, education, trainee aspects there. So it is ETUCE. The second one, Ekaterina already mentioned it because I'm a member of this, that is SHE, Schools for Health in Europe, where we have 41 countries within that network of schools for health with national coordinators. And I'm the national coordinator of Germany in that network. And this is important because there we also have a lot of good practices, examples on how to develop schools and also to develop good and healthy schools. The special concept I mentioned, that is what I'm talking about, that is about how to link education and health in a school setting as an add-in and not as an add-on. In 2009, we had a European conference on this topic to start it, to disseminate it, to communicate this idea to how to link education and health in schools. And the third one is an important one since 2018, that is the UNESCO Share, Global Health and Education, that is located at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris. And within that share, we are developing also this concept of health and education, safety and health and education, to bring this on the forefront, not only in Europe, but all over the world. So at my university, where I'm from, the Leuphana University in Lüneburg, that is near Hamburg in the northern part of Germany, we will probably have a new project for next 3 years where we plan to disseminate the concept of good healthy schools, mainly over Europe, with a link of UNESCO Share, with a link with ETUCE and the link to SHE network. So to distribute and to communicate this and to make conferences with it, to make country visits also, to visit people who are working on that concept so that we can learn from each other and to develop the concept further. So, as I said before in the beginning, that is important when we talk about schools, that schools are not static, schools are changing. And that could be important for us if we talk about safe and healthy schools. For example, how is the future of schooling look like? And Andreas Schleicher made 2 weeks ago, he made a presentation about this, and he developed a framework further, which they started, the OECD, in 2001, where they had the focus on schooling for tomorrow. And they identified in 2019 now 4 different directions of development. The schools are extended, education could be outsourced, so privatized. Schools are learning hubs in an area of the knowledge society. Schools are important for learning how to learn, and learning as you go. Maybe schools are very traditional ways of to learn something. Maybe the most of the time you learn outside, you learn in the internet and somewhere else. So schools may be overwritten by technology, as it said. So that I can only show you this, and to maybe you can start to think about, maybe you already think about this, and how the education system will change, and how can safe and schools and quality of schools change in this reforms that will be happening, I think, in the near future. So yes, so I come to an end. Good, safe and healthy schools. And what I want to say with Jean Monnet, nothing is possible without men and women, but nothing is lasting without institutions. That is important. Schools maybe remain in a way we don't know or yet, but it's important that we have institutions like ETUCE, for example. We need people who are enthusiastic about these topics. And I want to thank you very much for your attention. And I want to order your attention. Feel free to order the brochure on Good Healthy School from me. I will send it to you via email or as a printed brochure. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Paulus. This was a very interesting presentation and a very comprehensive outline of the different components and elements of the good and healthy, safe and healthy schools. And also very interesting to hear that you are going to work more on this project and trying to implement it more on the European level. So we're also looking forward to hear for the outcomes and to receive those things, those not only brochures, but also other outcomes of the project that you mentioned. And also, I would like to highlight something that you said, the idea that schools and education institutions are not static. So I hope that that also will be a discussion today on how it is changing and how do we ensure that it's still safe and healthy while the nature of it is changing. I would like to open the floor for the questions or comments for Professor Paulus. So please raise your hand. You can find it in the reactions on the bottom of your screen. If you would like to ask a question, you can also type your question in the chat and I will read it out loud. While we're waiting for the reactions from participants, I see Rosella already has a question, so I'm giving you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Ekaterina. And thank you to Professor Paulus. I just wanted to comment on two things that I was happy to see mentioned in his presentation. The fact that when he refers to the structure, the physical structures of schools that should be a place where students feel at home, feel well, feel protected. Well, this is one of the biggest problem in my country. We've been asking for many years now that the government finds the money in order to make schools safe places, but also attractive places to students. It's not just having the right windows, the right doors, enough space. The fact is that many schools are very gloomy and students get depressed as soon as they get into the school. So schools have been put in within buildings, old buildings, which were not planned to be schools when they were built. So the problem is also the environment, the general environment, the atmosphere is created also by the walls and the light and all kind of elements that makes a place attractive to people that have to work into. And that's one thing. The other thing that you mentioned, Professor Paulus, is the fact that the administration should make sure that people working, so that the education personnel, the education staff is not constantly put under stress. And that is this is a big challenge, I think, because in many countries, our profession, teachers, but as well as non-teaching personnel, are regarded as privileged ones. People working, having a job that is not so stressful. They work less hours than others. It's very easy because, you know, everyone can teach.
Yes.
You just need to have a degree to graduate somewhere, then you can teach, you're able to teach. So I think that we have to work a lot on this perception because teaching is very stressful. I've been teaching for more than 30 years now to many different ages, students of different ages. And I know perfectly well that if you do it well, and if you are committed to it, it is very stressful for many reasons. So I think we should focus more on the fact that society perceives our profession as a very easy, relaxing profession in comparison with other professions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can I answer?
Yes, please. Thank you, Rosella, for your comment. Professor, you can answer.
Yes, okay. You mentioned architecture, and the second one is under stress. And under stress, I just want to answer. That is one of my topics that I'm looking for. How can we help schools? And I developed an approach that is called person in situation approach. It is called person in situation approach, because I think that teachers are normal persons working in complex and difficult situations, and they are not difficult persons working in easy situations. So to change the perspective, often it is said that teaching is easy, little children there, but it's a very difficult situation there. And they are not difficult, complex persons. They are normal persons working in difficult situations. So we have to support them by changing situations, not only changing the person of a teacher. So we need more a psychology of situations instead of a psychology of persons. We often have this approach that we try to change and train the persons and forget the situations they are working in. And some of the situations are desolate situations, I would say, because in Germany also we have a lot of school buildings that need extreme renovation to be built in a better way. And therefore I'm working with school architectures. And at the moment I'm working with a project that is, they developed a school as a hybrid system. They argue that schools are no longer only for learning, that are as we call in Germany, a Lebenswelt, that is complementing everything, not only learning, but also living there. It's a living space, schools, and schools have to be rebuilt or renovated in that way, that this is a space where people stay all over the day and they live their life, the pupils their life, and have other motivations, not only to learn, but also to socialize with others, and all, you know this. But this is an interesting aspect. And this relates to the schooling for tomorrow that I showed you before, because OECD sees also that schools will be in the future, will be a kind of a youth center for young people, a center in the community where the community is focused with all their initiatives, so that there is a center in the community where maybe not only youth, but also intergenerational learning can take place. Elderly people are there. That is a place where people meet in the community, because families losing their socialization forces for the young people. So schools have taken over, and there will be a place in the community. It's a kind of a social anchor, social capital building there in the school, and will be open all day long, all year long, and they will integrate people from the community. Therefore, it links, your comment links it to the presentation I showed you, the slide I showed you before from the OECD, thinking about schooling for tomorrow. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, indeed, and it links back to the inclusive education overall, as schools are much more than just provision of the learning. It's a provision of inclusion, and often also there are situations where students do not feel like they have certain differences and they don't feel supported in their families, and school is the place to be supported for their diversity, etc. So, and the important question, obviously, of the image of the teaching profession, and that it's much more than just actually providing the knowledge. I have two more comments or questions. So I will give first floor to Luis Lopez from Portugal, and then Christian Chevalier from France. Luis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have two questions. One is, how important can it be the generalization of the use of the online interactive risk assessment tool?
Sorry, could you speak louder? I cannot hear.
Can you hear me now?
No,
can you hear me now?
Yet maybe Katerina, you can help me to understand, and then after maybe you understand it better than me.
Katerina, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Luis.
Okay,
go on.
The first question is, how important can be the generalization of the use of the online interactive risk assessment tool that was quite recently prepared in the analysis of how can a school be safe enough to promote safety? That's one of the questions. The second question is, in what concerns teachers, we are focused, and we were even focused before the pandemics, but we are still focused in evaluating the stress conditions, the burnout situations, the absenteeism from teachers. And the question is, shouldn't we also start evaluating the other side? I mean, not just absenteeism, but also presenteeism, not just burnout, but also bore-out. These are my two questions.
Okay. I'm sorry, I couldn't understand this.
No problem. Yes, Peter.
Technical reasons. So sorry for that.
Yes. So the first question was, I'm sure you heard about online interactive risk assessment, a tool that has been recently launched also at the European level. So the question was, how is this online tool, what role does it play in the general assessment of the health and safety learning? So that's the first question. And the second question is for the teachers, the focus on teachers and evaluating stress and health and safety situation. So the focus has been mostly on the absentees or burnouts, so kind of the negative side, while shouldn't be the focus also on those who are present and on the the workload and the other the opposite side of the negative elements, etc. Luis, correct me if I didn't catch something.
I specifically mentioned presenteeism and bore-out.
Did you hear that, Professor?
No, sorry. Yeah.
It was he specifically mentioned presentees and not the burnout, but the burnout.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I can. Yes, these are of course important topics. Presentism, for example, we have made research on this already. How many hours heads of school, we made research about head of schools, are in schools, although they should be absent because of illness. That is, of course, an important point. And the other one was about what was the other aspect, Katerina? The other aspect was
the burnout, not the burnout, but
yeah, bore-out. Yeah, is that, of course. This is yeah. I don't. Yeah, we don't have. We haven't thought about this. I know that problem, of course. Bore-out, maybe for pupils in the classroom. I had two master theses about this. Students, teacher students, I worked on that and made an empirical research about bore-out in the classroom, but not with the teachers. So, but maybe it could be an interesting point. But the other one you said is the presentism is an important point. Because it raises questions about how the administration of the school, the politics, and are looking after the work of the teachers. So they should be staying at home and not to be at school. And maybe nobody cares about that. So that is a real problem. And we have that in our research, we have that. And I'm not quite sure if we have some indicators about this. We have some indicators, of course, in our research projects we are running. Maybe I have to check this if we have this in our school check. You know, I talked about the school check, the indicators, and maybe I have to check that again to look if we have that.
And the first question was about the online interactive risk assessment. What is your opinion? What role does it play?
It is important. We are developing an own one at the moment. I'm sorry to say, here together with the DGUV in North Rhine-Westphalia, we are developing an online risk assessment model and a questionnaire to say, and also to offer as a kind of a platform, and also to offer support for schools from the results they have in that online. So if you can send me the link to this already existing risk assessment tool, then I would be happy to read this and to look after it. So
yeah, it's being developed. I mean, just launched at the European level. So I can send you that that link. Yes,
yeah, nice.
And yeah, and Louise, I'm sure that Professor Paulus will be happy also to get in contact with you for more detailed questions via email, right?
Yes, of course.
Yes. Okay, Christian.
Oui, bonjour, je vais m'exprimer.
Good morning. I'm going to speak French, if I may. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and exchanges. As others said before, the question of the architecture is very important. And in all buildings that are not being designed for today's life, we can see that in colleges, high school environment, it's in hidden parts. You have some bullying events, or you have fights between students. So the aspect of architecture is very important in France. This is an issue, a question that is more and more appearing, and in the municipalities that are now building buildings are really thinking about that. Today in Paris, we are reflecting on organizing playground areas, because very often there were exclusion areas, violent areas, busy with boys and not with girls, because boys and girls are different types of games. So this aspect is very important. I would like to ask to Professor Paulus whether he doesn't consider that the issue of sustainable development, environment issue could lead us to think more about organizing spaces in architecture. And you were talking about health and the question of nutrition, diets. This is very important as well. Now, today's debate opening new spaces, because you have to learn how to eat, because it's important for our health. And we can start working on this with our students, with organic food and sound and healthy food. So this is related to environment and sustainable development. And this, as you said, is a very complex issue, but it's a systemic one, isn't it?
Katerina, can you help me? Because I'm not able to speak French.
You can speak English, and we have a translation. Or you didn't hear the question?
Yes, and you need to translate the question.
All right, Christian, I will cover the question then.
Sorry.
No problem. Christian said that in France, the topic of architecture has been also very important, and overall this structure of healthy and safe environments. For example, they are talking about architecture of the playgrounds, that such aspects as exclusion places, where, for example, only boys are present but not girls because they play different kind of games, or violence areas where there were some fights happening, etc. So he raises the question about the connection also between the issues of sustainable development and environment, and how we build the future learning spaces, including also not the architecture only itself, but food provision, the food that is being distributed, that is healthy, that is environmentally friendly, etc. So that connection between the sustainable development and environment awareness and healthy and safe schools. Christian, did I cover it well?
I think this is an important comment. And
oui, tout à fait. Peut-être pour insister, est-ce que
absolutely. Can Professor Poulis listen to the English translation now?
Can you just translate this?
Professor Paulus, if you go at the bottom of your screen,
sorry.
there is a interpretation button, so you can choose English. Yes, but I hope I covered the question correctly.
Yes.
Oui, it's okay, Katarina.
Yeah, so I can answer what Katarina translated, and
Please go ahead.
I think this is an important comment you made, because this to link the sustainable development approaches to safety and health schools. We are working on this in the UNESCO share, that is in the global health and education, and there in that we have special topics on architecture, on sustainability and health, so that maybe this could be a good connection for you to link your comments you made on with the UNESCO share. And because I'm a co-chair of this UNESCO share, maybe we can cooperate then on this level with France and Germany and maybe other European countries on that topic. So that's what I could say to this.
Thank you, Professor. Christian, would you like to add something? No? Okay, good. Well, again, Professor, we will share your email with participants, and if they would like to reach out to you, then you can also continue communicating. Thank you very much for your presentation. So I will move to the next presenter, next speaker, Dominique Danau from the research, from SAGO Research, who did the research on this project. And so we heard the European perspective and the expertise from Professor. And here we will hear more about what the outcomes of the research showed us on this topic in the framework of our project on embracing diversity in education. Dominique, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. What I will try to do in the next 15 minutes, I will try to keep it as short as possible, but still that you can follow me, is to present some of the results that are coming out of the research that was done in the framework of the project, whereby the entrance was really inclusive education, and I will explain that a bit later. So what I will do in my presentation is to start, of course, with the objectives and the approach of the research, focusing on some of the opportunities and challenges of education systems these days as they were identified by the participants of the research, what is inclusive education, come to the 13 key elements that are coming out of the research as well of inclusive education, which also can be considered as conditions for implementation of inclusive education. And there I will focus on a safe and healthy learning and working environment. First, some of the objectives of the research and the outputs as well. Ekaterina already touched upon it, but so specifically for the research, so the three objectives were, first of all, to identify changes in society that have an impact on professions in education and training. Secondly, to identify training needs of teachers, education personnel who are working in a diverse classroom, in a diverse setting. And thirdly, also to identify good practices in relation to inclusive learning and working environments. So there are two main research outputs, as Ekaterina also already explained, the research report that is available to you in 3 languages, and the catalog of good practices that we are still working on. The approach of the research, first, there was an online questionnaire that was sent to all ETUCE members. And as you can see, we received inputs from 60 member organizations, which is not bad at all, I would say. Some desk research was done in order to provide some background, but also to contextualize the research findings. And a template was also sent to all ETUCE members to gather good practices. For the moment, there are about 45 good practices that have been gathered through these templates, and that will be part of the catalog as well. Now, one of the first questions that we asked to the respondents was to identify opportunities, but also challenges in relation to education systems today. And what we see is that some of these developments are at the same time identified as an opportunity and as a challenge. And that goes for social and cultural diversity. As you can see, 89% of the respondents, they identified this as an opportunity, but also 83% they see this as a challenge. The same counts for technological progress and digitalization. 89% again see that as an opportunity, while also 96% they see this as a challenge. And coming back or focusing on the theme of today to that technological progress, we also see that cybersecurity and data protection is linked. 88% of the respondents see this as a challenge. Another aspect which is also closely linked to our theme of today is continuous increasing workload of education personnel, as well as violence and harassment, including cyber harassment, which are considered by ETUCE members, by a large majority of ETUCE members who have participated in the research, as a challenge for education systems of today. As I said, so the entrance of the whole research was inclusive education, or is inclusive education, whereby we have taken the definition of UNESCO of inclusive education, whereby inclusive education is considered as a process. So it's a process in progress, and it's about strengthening the capacity of the education system to reach out to all learners. Every learner matters and matters equally is a citation that you are all familiar with, I presume. One of the things that we learn from the research as well, but that we also can see in literature, is that there is a new evolution in the definition of inclusive education, whereby in first instance there was a focus on learners with impairments, learners with disabilities, to include them in mainstream education, whereby now it's about education for all learners, whereby there might be a focus on learners who are running the risk of dropping out of the mainstream education system. Important here, and I will come back to that a bit later, is that it's considered as a process. So it's something that is not finished at a certain stage. what we also learned from the research is that there are different frameworks at European level, but also at international level, that are related to inclusive education and that underpin national frameworks and strategies, action plans that have been developed in relation to inclusive education. But at the same time, we also see that there is a big difference between what is on paper at national, at regional level, and what we see in reality. So how inclusive education is implemented actually. And the implementation gaps are caused by different things. On the resourcing is mentioned by the respondents, absence of embedding the voice of education professionals in the different stages of inclusive education, but also lack of preparation, lack of support. And these are two examples of citations that were mentioned by respondents in the survey that illustrate these implementation gaps that we can identify. Now, I will present you very shortly with the key elements that have been identified by the respondents to the survey and that can be considered as well as conditions for the implementation of inclusive education, whereby one of the elements is specifically about the topic of the webinar of today. But when you look to the other elements, when you look to the other 12 elements, you see that there is a direct link, in fact, between our topic on safe and healthy learning and working environment and these conditions that are related to the implementation of inclusive education. Starting with having a clear vision of inclusive education, which is based on a shared understanding. Now, and when you look to this element, but to the other elements as well, they may seem self-evident, but when you go in depth, and that we have seen in the previous webinar, but also in the seminar that we had in January, that it's much more complex, that it's much more complicated. So the clear vision of inclusive education should be the basis for the policy frameworks and mechanisms that are in place. And more importantly, perhaps there as well as that these are accompanied by sufficient public funding, which is not the case according to 58% of the respondents that have participated in the research. Embracing diversity, whereby diversity is considered as an asset and not as a problem, is very nice on paper, is a very nice principle. But again, here, the issue is that when you are, as an individual teacher in a classroom with a large group of students with different needs, with different abilities, and you have to respond to all that, you need some support. And that's another element. That's the fourth key element. So that there is a need for teacher support, support personnel, support mechanisms in the classroom in order to implement inclusive education. And that can be under the form of linguistic support, teacher assistance, but also opportunities for mutual learning and peer exchange, for peer learning as well. And that's an element that is strongly emphasized not only in this research, but also in previous researches that were done by ETUCE. Meaningful participation of teachers and other education personnel and learners, whereby the focus is on the meaningful, because what we also learn from the research that it's often about information and not so much about participation and involvement. And there the key message is not that all of the teachers, all of the education personnel and learners should be involved in all the stages of inclusive education, but that key is to identify who should be involved when and what is the best way to involve each of the groups. The next element seems to be a very obvious element, having initial education and continuous professional development for teachers, which is attuned to inclusive education. But again, here we learn from the research that it's actually not the case, especially for initial teacher education, that teachers are not always provided with the sufficient tools in order to be equipped to work in a diverse classroom. And I realize that I go very quickly through all of the elements, but there is a lot behind each of the elements, and that you can find in the research report, of course. Now, sufficient time within working hours to prepare for the classes, to consult with colleagues, with other professionals is another element which is stressed also by the respondents, and which is actually not in place according to 62% of the respondents. Adequate recruitment and retention policies for teachers and other educational personnel, which is also reflecting the diversity in the group of learners. The argument is there that the diversity in the group of learners should be reflected in the group of teachers and other education personnel in order to better understand the needs of the learners. Designing and implementing appropriate teaching learning aids, equipment and approaches, whereby the research learns us that mainly cooperative learning approaches are very useful, are relevant, efficient and effective in an inclusive learning environment, because there again students can learn from each other, can better understand the needs and the demands of the others. Cooperation, and that's cooperation at different levels between education professionals, but also between leadership and education professionals, between teachers and families, between teachers and professionals in other sectors, which is considered to be another key element. Adequate governance models of education institution, and the key role of leadership there. And Professor Paulus already referred to the whole school approach as a good way to implementing inclusive education. And that was also the theme of our first webinar. Adequate assessment and monitoring systems at two levels. First of all, at the level of education institutions, and that's in order to track the progress in the implementation of inclusive education against the frameworks that exist at national or regional level. And at the level of individual learning processes of students, whereby it's coming out of the research that there is still too much focus on performance, on exams, and not so much taken into account innovative pedagogical methods like group work, for example, and how to assess working in groups in a relevant and effective way. And then finally, the last element, the last key element, the last key condition is about a safe and healthy working and learning environment. But as I already said, when you look to the other 12 elements, they all have a link with this last point, in fact. And that is also explaining the complexity of the last point, because it is multi-dimensional. A healthy and safe learning and working environment is related to mental well-being, to physical well-being, to social well-being. It's related to various issues like cyberbullying, e-safety, workload violence and harassment. And it comprises the various building blocks, in fact, of an educational setting that we were talking about already this morning. It's about school policies. Is there a work-life balance policy, for example? Is there an anti-bullying policy? Is there a shared vision on what safety and healthy learning and working environment is? It's related to the teaching, to the learning, cooperative learning strategies to understand mutual needs, how to integrate health and safety issues across the curriculum. It is related to the physical environment. We talked already about the architecture this morning, about school facilities and infrastructure, but also outside spaces and transport to the school facilities. And it's related to community partnerships, because you are well aware of the fact that the school is not operating in a vacuum. It's interacting with with the local community where it is embedded. That means relations with the parents, but also cooperation with local health and social services, but for example also with local NGOs who are sometimes have programs about raising awareness about school safe and healthy issues. And as you can see, the different building blocks there, they are again related to a whole school approach. Now, I want to share with you some of the figures that are coming out of our research, and Ekaterina already mentioned it, so that 93% of the respondents, they say that there is an urgent action needed on the training of education personnel in relation to creating a safe and healthy learning and working environment, and more in particular about how to do it. It's not so much anymore what is it about, but more importantly, how to do that. But also 90% of the respondents, they say that urgent training is needed for education personnel in relation to appropriately manage their increased workload. And when we talk about an increased workload, I wanted to share with you some figures that I find interesting, and they are very recently published by the European Commission. More in particular about, they were published by Eurydice. And when you see that almost 50% of lower secondary teachers in Europe are experiencing stress at work, it's quite a large number, and perhaps more worrying are the figures when we look to Portugal, UK, England and Hungary, is that almost the double proportion there of lower secondary teachers experiencing a lot of stress at work is the double of the average proportion of lower secondary teachers experiencing a lot of stress at work in Europe on average. And the sources of that stress are related to administrative work, too much administrative work, too much marking, being held responsible for the achievements of the students, and 14% relates that to being intimidated or verbally abused by the students. Then I want to share with you some of the good practices that we received that are related specifically to this topic. First, perhaps two more general comments. First of all, that respondent from Iceland said that the causes of work-related stress and burnout amongst teachers need to be investigated. But also a safe and healthy working environment for the whole school, for the whole education community was stressed, especially in the light of COVID-19 pandemic. And I will come back to that a bit later. I'm from Poland there, but I think that Dorota will explain about that a bit later. A campaign about education during a pandemic and the support that was offered to teachers in relation to that. Another example that we received was a campaign from Scotland that was running from April 2018 until very recently, which was about time to tackle workload, so addressing the amount of work and overtime of teachers and the impact of that on their health and well-being. Another example came from Germany, which is a very interesting example as well. A network which is called Schools Without Racism, Schools Without, with courage, of course, not without, but with certainly, to engage both students and teachers in tackling any form of discrimination at school, as well as violence and bullying. Whereby teachers as well as students, they have to sign a contract where they commit to take responsibility to actively contribute to a school climate that is free of discrimination and violence. Other examples that were shared with us were strategies, the national strategy in Romania, that goes back from 2007, that was about tackling of violence in schools. The same for Cyprus, a national strategy that was launched in 2018 for the prevention and management of violence in schools. And I just want to share with you here as well that these are hyperlinks. So when you go to the PowerPoint presentation and you click on the hyperlinks, that you have a direct access to these examples. Another example was the action plan from Ireland on online safety, and a package of measures that was launched in France by the trade union, with annual brochures on gender equality, but also on preventing violence and sexual harassment in the workplace. Two more examples from the UK, where there was a conference held by the Teachers Union in 2018, which called for urgent action to secure the equality of LGBTI teachers in schools and colleges, and a German campaign, which is still online, and whereby there is a manifest also, and the campaign is about hatred and violence, against hatred and violence in educational settings. And then I wanted you to refer to the ETUCE network, which was already explained by the previous speaker, by Professor Pauws. Interesting is also the material that was developed by ETUCE very recently in relation to COVID-19, pointing to the specificities of the education sector in responding to measures that were taken at national and regional level to tackle the COVID-19 crisis, but also an implementation guide, and that's actually quite interesting guide that was developed in cooperation with the Employers Federation 2012 about the prevention and mitigation of third-party violence and harassments in schools, but also two action plans which go back already some years ago, but which entail still some interesting elements when you read the action plans. One on preventing and tackling violence, and one on teachers' work-related stress. As I already mentioned, and this was one of the elements that came clearly out of the research as well, that COVID-19 surely added a dimension to all what I was talking about, that it was an amplification, in fact, of existing issues that exist, like bullying and harassment through online education, but also an increasing workload of teachers, and the challenge of keeping a healthy and safe learning and working environment. And my last slide, but I will not read it. You can take your time, perhaps after the webinar, which is a citation of another research that was done a couple of years ago, and which clearly makes the link as well between diversity, between inclusive education, and between a safe and healthy environment for children and students more in general. So, as I said, as I started in the beginning, so it is a participative learning journey, which is very exciting, I think. And well, I want to thank you for your attention for my presentation. And of course, if you have questions, I'm here to try to give an answer to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Very interesting presentation. And what we see actually is that the topic itself is very relevant, not only for ETUCE or education trade unions, but for teachers and education personnel in particular, who feel like they lack the training and they lack the skills to address these issues. So, and you also saw a lot of very good examples from various countries where education trade unions are trying to fill in this gap of the training and to support their affiliates and education personnel in this, how to address this how-to questions, how to manage the workload, how to manage the stress, how to deal with the bullying, harassment, etc. I would like to quickly open the floor for questions to Dominique, if there are any, or comments on her presentation. Again, please raise your hand if you would like to ask the question. I do not see any hands so far, but Dominique is staying with us for the whole webinar. So if there are any questions that you would like to raise even later on, you can always ask it. Also, the PowerPoint presentations were shared with you. So please go ahead and click on the links, check the good practices. And if you have any particular questions, you can always reach out to Dominique and to know more about it. So, Professor Paulus, did you have a question?
No question, just a comment. It was a wonderful presentation. It was great. A lot of information in that. So thank you, Dominique. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. You also will have that presentation if you have any particular questions afterwards. You can communicate with Dominique on the research. All right, then I'm going to move to our next point on the agenda. As you saw, there are a lot of examples of how ETUCE member organizations and national education trade unions are addressing the issues of safe and healthy learning and working environments, including in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So with no further ado, I will move to national and trade union good practices on the safe and healthy learning working environments in education. We have speakers today from Ireland, from UK, and from Poland. And I will first ask Alison Gilliland from ETUCE, from Ireland, to present her union's good practices. Alison, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katerina, and great to hear those two previous presentations. I am the Equality Officer in the Irish National Teachers Organisation, which is the main union that organises for primary teachers in the Republic of Ireland and post-primary and primary in Northern Ireland. So we cover both jurisdictions. And I'm going to focus on the work the union has carried out to support LGBT inclusion over the last couple of years. So if you just put up the first slide there, I just provide an overview of our union. As I said, we cross both jurisdictions. About 50,000 members, 45,000 of those are in the Republic of Ireland. We sort of have a dual system with regard to contracting and paying teachers, in that our Department of Education pays the salary of the teachers, but individual boards of management employ the teacher. And those boards tend to be representatives of what we call school patrons. And a lot of those school patrons, 95%, are basically the church's religious patrons. So when it comes to our LGBT colleagues, and indeed parents and children and students, there can be a real or perceived tension between the religious ethos and the teacher's sexual orientation, and in that a lot of churches teach that it's not acceptable. And that does cause problems in our schools. We are very lucky that we have an active INTO LGBT teachers group. They organise among our membership and provide support, and they work very closely with me as Equality Officer. So next slide, please. So over the last, I would say, 2.5 years, we have carried out a number of actions to support our members, and indeed indirectly the parents and pupils and students who are LGBT+. We've carried out research. We've held an equality conference on the theme of LGBT inclusion. We've provided teacher professional development. We've trained our officers. We have developed a policy on pronouns. And most recently, last week at our conference, we had a very comprehensive motion passed that supports LGBT+ inclusion. And I suppose in a whole, you could say that as a union, we are really taking a proactive allyship approach to supporting our colleagues. Next slide, please. So with regards to research, in preparation for our equality conference, we carried out research among all our members, and we asked 5 key questions. We wanted to ascertain what the experiences of our LGBT teachers in our schools were, with regard to coming out, with regard to how safe they felt, with regard to how included they felt, and the general atmosphere in the school with regard to positivity towards a different sexual orientation. We also wanted to ascertain the views of colleagues who weren't LGBT plus as to their awareness of the issues that our LGBT colleagues face. We wanted to find out how confident and how informed teachers were in preventing and dealing with homophobic, transphobic and biphobic bullying among pupils and students. We wanted to find out experiences and I suppose confidence with regard to gender non-conforming pupils and students and pupils who may be transitioning between genders. And then we explored the whole concept of usualizing LGBT plus identities through the school curriculum. So you can see there from the graph that we had just over 2,000 responses, which was very good out of our entire membership. And when the breakdown of sexual orientation was considered, we could see that 1 in 10 respondents were LGBT plus. Next slide, please. So our key findings here, I've highlighted 4 of them. And I suppose the one that's most concerning is that many teachers actively hide their sexual orientation, with only 15% of our respondents who were LGBT plus out to staff, parents and pupils in their schools. So totally open in their school community. A proportion, 37%, were out to staff only. And that tended to be both by choice, but also concern where perhaps the principal may have said, or the school leader may have said, listen, you know, it's fine in the staff room, but we don't want the parents knowing. And you can see there from the quote in yellow, people are supportive on a personal level, but not on a level where colleagues are happy for me to be openly gay with pupils and parents. So there is that tension there. And of course, we had colleagues who were not out at all and those who were not out at school. So you can see, I suppose, that if you understand the situation, the mental health impact there on our members and the idea that they're hiding part of their identity. The other key finding was that there was a significant difference in the perception between teachers who identify as LGBT and those who didn't, with regard to the supportiveness of the staff room and the school, the view that policies were LGBT inclusive, and that the school in general had a positive environment for LGBT people. So the teachers who didn't identify as LGBT were of the view that their schools were more supportive, more positive, and more inclusive compared to the reality felt and experienced by LGBT members. In Ireland, we actually have national guidelines on homophobic, transphobic bullying that requires schools to educate to prevent homophobic, transphobic bullying. So unfortunately, and I think Dominique has highlighted there the need for training, our survey showed that almost 90% of our teachers hadn't received any training. Now, most of them felt confident in challenging homophobic and transphobic name calling by pupils, but we were conscious on how exactly they were challenging that, if they were implementing best practice or if they were just challenging it and leaving it without a follow through that would be an educational follow through. And then when it came to gender non-conforming pupils or students and students who were transitioning, and by that we mostly mean social transitioning, so change of name mostly. We noted that 3/4 of schools did not have gender neutral toilets, and over half didn't provide their pupils and students with gender neutral uniform options. Very, very few had actually got experience of supporting a child who was socially transitioning. And those who did cited lack of support, lack of knowing what to do. And that is across the board, whether it be at leadership level and also at our Department of Education level. We do have one organisation that in the country that provides support. And I suppose from an equality officer receiving queries on that regard, we will put them in touch with that organisation. Next slide, please. So our key recommendations coming out of that is that all teachers need to be made aware of the need for LGBT inclusion and visibility within the school context. And the visibility and representation is, I suppose, a key consideration in that you, as an LGBT colleague or parent or child, pupil, need to see representation of your identity within the school community, both the class and the general school environment. Another recommendation was that teachers are provided with comprehensive training and support, and that we have agreed guidelines and resources to empower schools to implement best practice. We're very conscious that there are many schools doing great work. They're really inclusive and usualize LGBT identities in the curriculum, have signs and symbols and resources within LGBT identities, but there are others, and one particular line in the survey comes back to me is that we don't have any LGBT teachers, children or parents. So we don't have to do it, but that's not the point. It is, how do we know that there aren't, particularly when you look at the statistics that we have gathered, that so many of our colleagues aren't out. We also need our patron bodies and management bodies. And this, I suppose, is the tricky one, because it does very much involve our religious churches publicly affirming their regard for and support of the implementation and equality legislation and relative guidelines, such as the anti-bullying guidelines that requires schools to teach about homophobic, transphobic bullying so that they can prevent it. We need the employers to make it explicit that they are equal opportunity employers on all applications, and that they provide a guarantee of privacy and confidentiality. While none of our colleagues indicated that they were discriminated against with regard to employment or promotion, many had concerns that what they wrote in their application may end up outside that interview or promotion panel. They were also concerned that if they came out publicly in school, it would inhibit their opportunity for promotion or for permanent employment. And then the final recommendation there was that all schools implement a culture of zero tolerance towards homophobic, transphobic and biphobic language and actions. And I suppose all of that can stem from the main recommendation, and the main need we would see there is that there would be agreed guidelines, resources to empower all schools, and that all schools will be required to meet these at the same level. Next slide, please. So at our conference, we held it in February last year. We saw it as an opportunity to contribute to awareness raising and visibility for our LGBT colleagues, and to contribute to training, and that we organised a series of workshops. As a union, we were also showing allyship. We asked Dr. Ellie Barnes from Educate and Celebrate in the UK to be our keynote speaker, and she and her charity have done a huge amount of work in the UK to highlight LGBT issues and to train schools. We also produced a docu-film that raised awareness by listening and hearing teachers, LGBT teachers' experiences throughout the years. It also documented the history of our LGBT teachers group, particularly their campaign to change our equality legislation. Previously, religious patrons could positively discriminate to uphold the ethos of the school, which meant they could legitimately reject a teacher who was LGBT and cite that it did not align with the ethos of the school. But now in the new legislation, the bar is much, much higher. They actually have to prove that it would damage the ethos of the school if they were to contract such a person. You'll note there in the, I suppose, the little screen grab of the docudrama, there are two teachers who are blacked out. And that's an indication of the feeling and the experience still of some of our teachers that they can't be openly public about their sexual orientation. Next slide, please. So following on from our conference, I, as well as being the equality officer, I'm also the learning director. So I worked with the INTO LGBT teachers group to design and facilitate a 5-module online professional development course for our teachers in Ireland, where teachers undertake such a course during the summer months, and it's approved by the Department of Education. They can take 3 extra personal leave days during the school term. So it's a great incentive for colleagues to undertake professional development. So you can see there the 5 modules. Module 1 was around LGBT identities and visibility. And in this, we're very much speaking to the teachers themselves and to educate them about the experiences of our LGBT colleagues, and also the terminology. We looked at gender nonconformity, gender transition, homophobic bullying, the idea of creating an LGBT inclusive classroom through curriculum and through resources, and then the overall school inclusion one. And I see Ekaterina's note that I have 3 minutes. We also used animated video examples of best practice. It's not the type of thing that you can show in the classroom. So we decided to use animation, and thank goodness we did, because with COVID in March, we actually couldn't get access to the classroom. So we're going to play this one, and you can have an idea of the approach we took when it comes to supporting teachers' best practice. So Vim, if you can play that for me, please.
One day I had a pupil named Ray who asked a question in class out of the blue. "Teacher, what does gay mean?" One of the other children, Julie, chimed in. "My mum says Georgie's mum is gay." Another child, Sergio, said, "Oh, she can't be. Only boys can be gay." It would have been far easier to discuss this in a planned way, but the conversation was happening now, and I had to support their understanding in an appropriate way. So I asked, "Where did you hear that word, Ray?" "I heard it online," he answered. I thought it was positive that the question wasn't coming from name calling. Then I said, "Well, gay can mean a few things, but mostly it's about love." I explained to him that when you're older, the person you were in love with could be another boy, or it could be a girl. A boy who falls in love with another boy might call himself gay. A girl who falls in love with another girl might call herself gay, or because they're girls, they might call themselves lesbian. Ray asked, "So it doesn't matter if you love a girl or a boy? Can you get married?" "Yes," I said. "In Ireland, you can marry whoever you love." Gay is not a bad word, though sometimes people use it to try to hurt others, and that's wrong. It's always best to check with the person which words they like to use for their own identity. Ray said, "Okay, I get it now." I elaborated that families come in all shapes and sizes, some with 2 mums, some with 2 dads. The most important thing is looking after each other and loving each other. In the weeks after, I used picture and storybooks to teach lessons about LGBT+ identities, and that really helped deepen their understanding and empathy.
Thanks very much for that. I'm conscious of time, so I leave the rest, but it's basically around our pronoun policy. We trained our union officers. You can scoot through the slides, please. And then that's our pronoun policy. And then at our conference last week, we passed a substantial motion that basically puts it on the workload now of our executive that they do have to engage with the Department of Education, the Teaching Council and other bodies to get those policies and those good practice in place. And then the last slide, please. And it is very much that idea that as a union, we have to be leaders, we have to be allies for our LGBT colleagues, and we have to promote their inclusion in a positive and proactive way. Thanks very much, and sorry for going over the time, Katerina.
Thank you very much, Alison. Very many interesting good practices, and congratulations to INTU for having such a comprehensive work, basically starting from the research and then moving to the actions and then putting it on the table of the leaders. This is very important to go through all of those stages. I suggest that participants, if you have any questions to Alison on her presentation, you either put them on the chat so we collect them, or you keep them in mind, and then we will ask those questions after we had heard all three speakers. All right. So with no further ado, I will move to Selma Augustad from Scotland, from EIS, to present the good practices from her union. Selma, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Katrina. I'm just going to get my PowerPoint up. So hopefully you can all see that. Yeah, good. Okay, so my name is Selma Augustad. I'm the National Equality Officer at the Educational Institute of Scotland, and I'll be sharing with you some information about the anti-racist work that we have done in the last year, looking in particular at our anti-racist leadership learning programme. So firstly, just to set a bit of context for our union's work, the EIS has a long-standing commitment and policy on anti-racism, and within our structures, this is reflected through AGM motions from members, which have directed our work in this regard, and also through the anti-racist subcommittee that we have, which has Black, Asian and minority ethnic members represented, and this group acts as an advisory body to our Equality Committee. The EIS have also recently established a new national BAME network, which meets online, and we are just concluding our first anti-racist strategy, which the project I'll detail later on is part of. So I just wanted to mention that although the EIS currently use the term BAME to mean Black, Asian and minority ethnic, we recognise the contested nature of this term and its limitations. So before I go into talking a bit more in depth about our anti-racist leadership learning project, I wanted to just do 2 quick poll questions about your own national contexts to get some conversations going in the chat, hopefully. So could I get those questions up, please? So I'm aware that the UK is one of the few countries in Europe that holds that it still records ethnicity data. So this enables us to track progress or lack thereof of underrepresentation in terms of diversity of the profession, but this might be different from your contexts. So question 1, does your union have access to information about the race or ethnic diversity of the education profession in your country? Question 2, does your union collect information about the experiences of underrepresented groups of members? So that's underrepresentation in terms of race and or ethnicity. And question 3, has your union locally or nationally engaged with Black Lives Matter or anti-racism topics in the last year? So I'll just give you a little bit to answer that. And please feel free to write in the chat if you would like about how you've engaged, how you would like to engage, or if there are any barriers that exist to you engaging with these topics. So as we're waiting for the results to come in, I'll just pick up on the next bit on the slide because I realize we have very limited time. So in Scotland, the census data from 2011 showed that BAME people made up 4% of the population, but less than 2% of the teaching profession, and that's even less in promoted posts. Very, very recent data that we have show barriers at every single career stage for BAME applicants. So when we look at the qualification rates for initial teacher training, this is lower for BAME pupils at nearly a quarter of all entrants not completing the course, compared to only 15% of white peers. So we're clearly seeing a problem there for the immediate stage when you enter the profession. Our BAME member survey from 2018 showed that 71% experienced racism at work, and this was much higher for African, Caribbean and Black members than for Asian members. And most commonly it came from learners, but also from colleagues. 43% have been overlooked for promotions, and again this was higher for Black members. 25% had been racially bullied or harassed, and again this was 45% for Black members.
Selma, I think we can show the results.
Yeah, great. Okay, so it's about 61% who do not have information about the race or ethnic diversity of the education profession, and 40% who do. So that's quite interesting. Obviously, the access to information will really impact the ability to organize around the issues. And in terms of collecting that specific information from underrepresented groups and members, it's about 50-50 again. So that's also really interesting. And please do contribute to the chat. It would be fascinating to hear how you do that, or how you plan to do that, or why you don't do that, and what the barriers are, or why that hasn't perhaps been a topic for you. And in terms of your union locally or nationally engaging with Black Lives Matter or anti-racism topics in the last year, it's almost 50-50 there as well. And I'm wondering if there's a link between these three questions. If you have the information, are you more likely to be involved, or is the lack of information a barrier to being involved? So if you are open to sharing some of your thoughts on that in the chat, please do. It would be really interesting to see. Thanks so much for answering those questions. Okay. So we saw a real opportunity last year to intensify our anti-racist work as members and learners were engaged with Black Lives Matter discussions. But also due to the pandemic, many were looking to reimagine futures and imagine a more equitable return to work. The Scottish Government also committed to exploring anti-racism in education, and funding was available through Scottish Union Learning's Equality and Leadership Fund, which we secured for realising parts of our anti-racist strategy. So as we saw that opportunity, we developed an anti-racist strategy to organise the work of the EIS Education and Equality Department in this regard. So this was developed in the summer of 2020. And then overview of that strategy is now on the slide. So our first objective was to raise general awareness amongst our membership about racism and knowledge how to respond to it. So the first step is information. What are the problems and what can we do about them? So we developed a poster campaign to raise awareness and interest in tackling racism and to promote action. And we hosted 2 all-member webinars. So quite lucky in a way that we are able to attract quite a large audience through the online forum in a way that we just wouldn't have been able to if we were meeting in person. The webinars focused on Black Lives Matter in education with a guest speaker from the American Teachers Trade Union. And the second session was on anti-racist allyship. How can white people act as allies for Black Lives Matter? The second objective was to mobilize membership for anti-racism. So you have the information, what are you going to do about it? And try to put that into action. So we delivered a program of leadership learning to mobilize anti-racist activism in the union and education for equality reps, school reps, local association secretaries, that's our branch secretaries, head teachers and deputy head teachers, which I'll talk about a bit more in detail shortly. And we also developed bespoke resource packs, including guidance. The third objective was to contribute to the work to integrate anti-racism in the curriculum, and we've done this through being involved in national conversation. The final objective was to increase Black, Asian and minority ethnic representation within education and the trade union. And we did this through establishing the national network for Black, Asian and minority ethnic members. And we hold events and learning through that network, which has been really successful operating online. So I'm just going to look a bit more in depth at our anti-racist leadership learning course. We had loads of interest in this course. We had about 111 people sign up, although due to the pandemic, quite a few had to withdraw. So we changed our strategy and we've hosted some more materials online. The issues that we had identified were isolation and an adverse impact of racist experiences on BME members, a lack of understanding and commitment among school leaders, especially in less diverse areas. So seeing it, oh, it's not that much of a problem here because there's less diversity. So we're lacking commitment there, and a lack of confidence and understanding amongst union representatives. Our aims, therefore, were to connect BAME members and facilitate greater understanding of workplace rights and anti-racism. And we wanted to empower reps locally and equip school leaders with the information that they need. Ultimately, though, we wanted to win the hearts and minds to the anti-racist cause. And I will share an example of how we did that later on in the presentation, if there's time. So in terms of the learning activity that followed, this was developed in partnership with the Scottish Association of Minority Ethnic Educators. So we thought it was really important to partner with them as they are the expert on anti-racism in the profession. The course was split into 2 modules, with both modules being specific to each participant group. So there were 4 participant groups, as you can see here on the slide. The first module involved awareness of the state of play for diversity in the profession, experiences of BAME educators and pupils, and anti-racist theory. Module 2 focused on anti-racist leadership, allyship, and more practical implementation. As I said, one of our main aims was to mobilize people by inspiring them or winning them over to the cause. And we did this through commissioning a poet, Hannah Lavery, who's quite a well-known Scottish poet, and she contributed 6 very powerful poems to our learning activity. And I wanted to just play for you one of these poems today. Just a warning that the content is perhaps a little bit upsetting. It does contain description of racist verbal abuse towards a child, and the child is the poet herself's son. I'm going to share that with you now, if the slide works.
After school. My son comes home crying, tells me a boy in his class said he looks like the colour of shit, that his skin is the colour of bad people. The parents were very sorry. This is not their son, not their son. No, it's mine. We will make sure they never change alone in the change room. Now, only the supervised showing of skin. Her face flashes irritation at parents' evening. What a fuss I'm making. It's lucky, she says, looking past me. It's lucky that he has Oma in the class. He loves Oma, but why, I think, why is that lucky for my son? Looking past me, the boy, his parents say, it's very unusual for him to act this way. You know, his mother, she cried when she heard. I'm silent. We will supervise them now when they change for gym. This is not like their son, they say. I cry at home when he is asleep, alone after my white friend says, it's just awful, but you know, it's just what kids. This is not like our son. No, it's mine. It's my son. Undressing by the teacher, in fear they will become again so unlike themselves.
Okay, so this was one of the poems and the examples that we used for head teachers in particular. And I think it was really, really effective in linking, talking about the trauma that children experience that follows them into adulthood. So it's really important to recognize that these are issues that affect our BAME teachers and affect people who are considering teaching as a profession, if this is something that they have experienced themselves in school when they were pupils. So because so many participants were unable to commit to the live sessions, we hosted further learning in online videos, and we included the poetry videos that you saw as well. So all of these are available on our website if you want to take a look in your own time. We also developed practical guidance for school reps on mobilizing for anti-racism at work. So this included learning content, but also more practical advice, examples and tools, as well as glossaries and action plan templates. We're currently developing versions for BAME members themselves and for school leaders, which are forthcoming. And these are live documents, so we're seeking feedback from members continuously to improve them because we recognize the conversation is ongoing and ever changing. In terms of the lessons that we've learned from this project, it's clear that participants wanted even more practically focused guidance. So they have the knowledge now, what can they do about it? How can they put it into practice? And real life examples, including discussion time with colleagues to build networks. Further activities need to do more to reach out to those who are less engaged and working in less diverse areas, who often think it's not a concern to them. And I think this is a real barrier, that the people who perhaps need the training the most are not necessarily the people who will come forward and volunteer to take the training. So we're trying to tap into existing networks to do some of that. So what's next? We're in the process of drafting our strategy for next year, which is why I was very interested in your perspectives of what you're doing, because hopefully there's something in that that we can learn from each other and take forward. And this is just an invitation to chat in the chat. It'd be great to hear from you what you're experiencing in organising for anti-racism in your local context, or the opportunities that you see. So going forward, we'll be developing more practical workshops for members. We're using existing networks to reach members who are yet to be won over in different ways. We are planning to hopefully have more school leadership courses on anti-racism, and we will keep up the commitment in national forums. We've developed a suite of posters that will go into school when schools are fully open. That is now or very soon. And we're growing the BAME network, as well as encouraging BAME members to stand for EIS Council to help to diversify the union internally. Okay, thank you so much for listening. I look forward to discussing further with you all.
Thank you, Selma. Also, congratulations on such an interesting, good practice. And it's really great that we have those materials online, that you have those materials online, so our participants can also check them. And it is also a very great approach to have things as a living instruments, like the strategy that you mentioned, or the practical guidelines, that they can be updated all the time, because the conversation keeps going, like you said. And I also saw in the chat there were already some reactions to your questions. For example, in Romania, the FSLI union collects information about the Roma community, which is also specific for the Romanian national context, and other national minorities, but do not have any involvement regarding the Black Lives Matter, because they are not the minority in the country. Also, there was a comment from Portugal, from Joaquim Santos, where he says that he gathers materials on LGBTI students and teachers, and he also asks to send if there is any information or materials, which Selma, you have plenty, so I also encourage you to get in contact with other participants. So I will, yes, and there is more comments from Alison, where in Ireland they start exploring the racial, ethnic and cultural diversity in the Equality Committee of the Union. And also they piloted an understanding and preventing racism online professional development course, as well as looking at the training to understand the far right and its implications for inclusion. So very comprehensive and different elements, including work. I will move to our last speaker from Poland, and then we'll leave a few minutes also for questions or comments on the presented good practices. Dorota, from Poland, from ZMP, I'm giving you the floor to present the practices from your union. Thank you. We do not hear you, so I think you need to unmute yourself. Dorota, we still don't hear you.
Sorry, I'm very sorry.
No problem. Now we hear you well.
Okay. I would like to thank you very much for the invitation to this very interesting seminar. And thank you very much to all speakers for very interesting and inspiring presentation and lecture. On request of ETUCE, I would like to focus on only one aspect of the problem. I would like to present our good practice on providing psychological support to teachers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it will be maybe a little bit different to the previous presentation, and I would also like to stress in this very moment that ZNP was not a member of the project on inclusive schools. We only read the documents, very interesting documents, but I will not make the connection to the project in my presentation. In March 2021, a year has passed since the schools were first closed. It was, and it still is, one of the longest lockdowns in Europe. All the primary and lower secondary school students spent only a few weeks at school this year, in September and at the beginning of October, and then in January and the first half of February. And during that time, they studied remotely, and for many students, it was another year in which remote teaching replaced school education for a very long time. And it was also a very difficult time for teachers. Also, our trade unions faced many challenges like the other trade unions, not only in Europe. And we have such two priorities, the main priorities. Ensuring work safety for teachers from kindergartens and lower grades of primary school and also special schools. And it was obvious to us that their psychological comfort depends on the security at the workplace and that their health is safe. And at the same time, we tried not to lose sight of the group of teachers who worked remotely and provide them with as much competent and reliable information as possible. And we also tried to monitor their situation in such a quick, short questionnaire, something like Pulse. Our weekly, The Teacher's Voice published nearly 100 articles reporting on the situation in schools across the country and presenting also interviews with experts, psychologists, doctors, and epidemiologists. The important information immediately found its ways to social media, website, smartphone application of ZNP and newsletter, because we believe that the awareness that teachers do not stand for themselves, that they are kept informed about the situation and that about and also about our action and intervention also gave them a certain sense of security. You can ask, of course, why we communicate with our ministry or government via post. And it was a simple reason, because in this time the social dialogue in Poland doesn't exist. The minister changed and we didn't have any possibility to discuss the problem together with our Ministry of Education or other educational bodies. In those activities, we were also successful. They were organized 2 free coronavirus tests for those working in kindergartens and primary schools, and teachers were included in the priority group, and as well as the administration and technical staff in education. The vaccination started in February, which benefited 550,000 people working in the education system. And it was also very important for us that we included those who are on leave or on sick leave due to comorbidities too in this group. But after some articles about the psychological situation, the Psychoeducation Foundation contact us, and they offer the free consultation to teachers and organize such a free online psychological help for teachers. And as you can see, the title of this slide is Working Together, because we, as trade union, we will be not able to organize professional help to teachers without professional organizations. So this cooperation with NGOs was very important for us. And during this consultation, one person can use 3 sessions. A single session lasts about up to 45 minutes. Of course, the consultations are organized via Skype, and it was also for us very important that the experts, the psychological and psychotherapists provide this consultation to our teachers. And there are really specialists in the therapy in crisis intervention, and with particular emphasis on the COVID-19 pandemic. After this successful cooperation, we started the cooperation with Orange Foundation and with subject project Lesson Enter, and we organize support for teachers in the form of the project I Teach Others, I Take Care of Myself. I don't want to explain in this group that teachers' well-being is crucial for education, and it's good for them to be able to take care of themselves, because a teacher who feels good is more efficient and could take care about the development of students and their competencies. So at the end of November, we ask teachers about the problem they face, especially in the field of distance education. And what was important, they stress that the most important thing for them is motivating students and as well take care for themselves. So we started with a series of articles in our magazine, and then finished with 2 open webinars. One of them was empathy for yourself and how to use the potential, the strengths in motivating the student. It was the second webinar. Of course, all those materials from the seminars are available and one can download if there are if somebody couldn't participated in the webinar in the real time, there are colleagues can still use this now. As I said, our Teacher's Voice, our magazine still presented the article about the well-being of teachers and mental security, mental safe of teachers. So there are a few quotations from those articles. It was important that there are not only, among authors are not only experts, but also academic persons who in this time made researches about the situation of teachers in the pandemic time. And also there are articles of other teachers who want to share their experience with colleagues. I don't want to read those quotations because you received the presentation. So if you want, you can read this also later. And we really know that the price of distance education is high, and we can summarize this with such a 3 words: stress, depression, and fatigue. And we also use such a slogan as concern for teachers' mental health is care for students' mental health. This idea was for us very important when we start to prepare such a 2 brochure for our teachers. The one was safety, learning and work, and the other was very interesting and prepared at the very beginning of the pandemic time. It was the publication prepared together with the Office of Polish Ombudsman. With experts, also experts from ZNP, and it was a practical guide for teachers and principals how to safely conduct distance lessons. Because, as you mentioned, we have a lot of problem with harassment, and such a new experience of, during this remote education with the kind of aggression. So we thought that such a practice advises how to help themselves in conducting lessons with students should be very important for teachers. And at the end of my short presentation, I would like to stress the other problem. I would like to highlight a phenomenon that we have more problems with increasing aggression amongst students. And we worried us a lot, and because of this, and we try to help our teachers to manage this situation, because it's not the problem only of increasing aggression during this distance learning, but also when they come back to school. So we prepared a series of webinars about the problem, about the threats to children and young people on the internet, because they spend a lot of time in front of the computer. And we also try to make aware our colleagues and help them in managing such a situation like this disinformation and fake news. So it's the other kind of our activity. We also prepare some online training for our teachers about fake news and about the problem with misinformation. So it's all. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any question, I'm ready to answer those questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorota. This is very interesting. And I must say that throughout this whole year, indeed, education trade unions really step up their work on supporting affiliates, on supporting teachers and other education personnel during this difficult time, in particular also on this issue of stress and the psychological problems linked to the pandemic and issues linked to the distant learning, etc. So there is a lot of different actions that ZMP has done, and it was very interesting to listen about it. I saw one question, and I'm opening now the question for the floor for the questions for just a few minutes. I already saw one question in the chat from Claudio. It was, is there an English version of the Polish guide? Dorota, is there an English version? Is there an English translation of the guide that you mentioned on how to safely?
Yes, I'm very sorry. We have in this very moment only the Polish version, but I try to organize the English version to you because I can ask our English-speaking colleague to prepare such a summarizing of this guide, or maybe they can do this. If you are really interested, we will be happy to share with you this experience.
Thank you, Dorota. That would be great, and ETUCE then will make sure to disseminate that among member organizations. There is also a comment from Rosella to responding to Salma's question about various initiatives on addressing the ethnic minorities. Rosella says that in Italy, during our 3 years involvement in AI OSF project on migrants and refugees integration through education, they organized seminars and trainings in northern regions of Italy where racism is more widespread. And EIS also gave its support for the activities of OL Scuola with unaccompanied minors, which they are very grateful for. So we heard many different good practices today, and we actually saw that the issue of safe and healthy learning environments is very closely interconnected with the various different aspects, which includes training, teacher training, continuous professional development, but also school leadership training, because often they're the ones who are responsible for the overall environment in the education institution. We also heard how important is the language that is being used in education institutions, also the such issues as architecture of the institutions, different spaces, of course, the issue of stress and workload, which is especially raising concerns in the past year with the distant learning, etc. And we also saw that education trade unions all around Europe actually do a lot of implement a lot of different actions to address those various aspects. And they start from researching the issue and finding out how much the education personnel actually knows about it, or the society, and also continuing into providing the space for discussions, the platforms, providing the training even itself for affiliates. And what is also very important is providing the opportunities to share the personal experience, because often, especially in this issue of safe and healthy learning environment and working environments, it is very much linked to personal experiences, which might be very diverse from person to person. And it's important that when we talk about inclusive education, everyone feels safe, first of all, to talk about their experience, but then also everyone feels safe and feels like they can focus on their work or on learning in a healthy environment and feeling that they belong to that environment. So I would like to thank all the speakers and to say again, to remind you, maybe next slide is also will be good. So to remind you that all of those good practices that were presented today, you will be also able to find them in the catalog of good practices, which will be shared during the closing conference, but also in the online database of ETC good practices. There will be details there. There will be links that you can click on and check for more information and reach out to those unions if you are interested in them. There is one more interactive training webinar left that will be provided on 29th of April, and it will focus on digital technologies in media, how to use them to foster the inclusion and education. So I invite you all to register if you haven't yet. And I also invite you and remind you about the two action days that we would like to support and organize European and national actions for. So that's International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia on the 17th of May, and World Teachers Day, which coincides with the closing conference of this project. Next slide, please. So, few last announcements. You already received some of the PowerPoint presentations before this webinar, but we will send you again all the slides presented today. You also will have the recording of today's webinar posted on the ETUCE YouTube channel. Important, it will be in English, French, and Russian. So please disseminate it among your networks, among your affiliates, because they can listen to this information and find it also useful, especially if they were not able to be with us today. And finally, we will send you an evaluation form, and we kindly ask you to fill it in because we would like to know more about your experience from this webinar and to use it to improve our future activities. So before I close this meeting, I would like to ask you kindly all to start your cameras so that we can take one shot all together and we can use it to promote the seminar later on. And I'm waiting for my colleagues to tell me that it is